and a very warm welcome to all our dear viewers. Myself, Joya Khan, Ambassador of Change from GETI, and your host for this live session. Heralding the dawn of a new era and holding the beacon of excellence, I bring greetings from the entire Global Education and Training Institute fraternity. And as we usher in winds of change to steer this session ahead, I warmly welcome our esteemed speaker on this live forum of Talks for Educators, Ms. Charlotte Kemp, international futurist keynote speaker, all the way from the Western Cape, South Africa. Ma'am, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you
Ms.
so much.
Charlotte will be condensing her thoughts on why futures literacy is the new essential skill for educators. Dear viewers, we are all aware that futures literacy as a skill has a great potential for every person to improve their understanding of the ability to change the future. Being futures literate empowers the imagination, enhances our ability to prepare, recover, and invent and adapt as changes occur. A little about our esteemed speaker. Ms. Charlotte Kemp is the futures alchemist, a futurist keynote speaker who works with organizations to co create preferred futures. She is the immediate past president of the Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa. She is the president elect of the Global Speakers Federation and is a professional member of the Association of Professional Futurists. She is also the author of a number of books, including Futures Alchemist. She hosts a podcast series called Futures Facets and interviews people around the world to gain an understanding of how we see the future from our different points of view. She also serves on on a number of occasions on boards and steers committees and works as an association futurist. Miss Charlotte lives in Cape Town, South Africa, but loves to travel and speak internationally. So over to you, ma'am, for the session. Once again, a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. As my introduction has said, I'm talking about futures literacy today. We know that it's a very important topic. So are we sharing my slides? So what is futures literacy? Let's make sure we understand what we're talking about today. Futures literacy is a way for us to talk about or to read the future. A lot of us feel like the future is unknown to us, but we really do have ways to start to understand what is coming. And it's very important for us to do that. It's also a model to begin to read the future better. So there are, just like in any education field, many tools and models that we can use. This is a quote we shared recently about futures thinking. And what it says is that, and this is just about literacy, we humans invented literacy, which means it doesn't come for free with our genes like speech or vision. Every brain has to learn it afresh. So just as we need to learn literacy, just as we teach our children and in education, we teach them how to read and how to read different languages. Futures literacy is one of those languages we need to learn and we need to teach. And it is essential for us in preparing our students for the future. I'm going to take you back a little bit and show you a picture of my family a very, very long time ago. It's an old black and white photograph. The people in the top right-hand corner there are my grandparents. And the young man in the front row with the long pants, that was my father. And this is an interesting photograph to look at because it's a very old-fashioned photograph, which reminds us where we came from, the weight of the history that we have. My father, we went to visit my grandparents one Sunday afternoon, just as I was coming towards the end of my high schooling career. And my father took that time with the family to discuss what my future might be and what kind of degree I need to get from university and which kind of corporate I need to go and work for and how I need to start setting up my retirement plans for my very first paycheck. And it was an interesting, fun conversation. but it really wasn't very helpful in preparing me for the reality of the future that I was experiencing. This is a photograph of me a few years ago working and doing the work that I do. And it's an interesting photograph because it demonstrates all of the skills and the work that I do these days. So there I am standing on stage speaking because I am a professional speaker. In the background is an image. You may not be able to see it very clearly, but what it is, it's a footprint with a digital code in it. And I was talking about our online presence, our social media presence. And that was because I had come from the last couple of years, the last decade before working on futures thinking. I'd been talking about social media. So I'm teaching about social media, but I'm also talking about preparing for the future. So I was acting as a futurist. So if you're keeping count, that's professional speaker, social media moderator, social media teacher, futurist. And the audience I'm talking to are association executives because that's my other job. I work with associations. So in one photograph, we see 4 different things, different careers that I have been involved in the last decade or so. And not one of those could my father have anticipated when he was helping me to prepare for my education. He was helping me to prepare the way he thought his education should have gone, not what was the reality of the world that I was going into. And this highlights a number of problems for us. There's so many different challenges. One being not just that the world population is growing, which is a big problem, but the exponential nature of the world. Everything is so much faster these days than it has ever been before. Things are faster, technology comes out faster, laws have to respond quicker, there are more and more people, there are more and more online platforms and more things we need to know. And it can be very overwhelming. The pace of the world is only getting faster. And how do we as educators keep up with that? The world is also getting way more complex. There are so many more decisions to be made. There are so many more things that we should be aware of. And we're also entering a world that is quantum. And it's difficult to describe quantum in an easy session, but quantum is just that in the past, we assumed things were linear, like a linear progression, that things could either be binary, like on or off, yes or no, white or black, or 0 or 1. Everything was binary and obvious. And the quantum world and quantum computing and quantum options just means that there are so many more ways that we can express ourselves that we never could before. And we also want to look at these kinds of pictures that they are very futuristic, but we are finding ways that we are emerging ourselves into this metaverse, that we are using augmented intelligence, that we are using other kinds of tools to achieve way more than we could have before. The problem is, and please, this is no judgment on your system at all, because I'm not very familiar with how you do things there, but broadly, globally, around the world, we are still educating our children in a way that was appropriate for the 18th century, not for the 21st century. We are educating our children to put them into factories, to put them into offices, to do certain kinds of work. And a lot of that kind of work has been replaced by robots or by artificial intelligence or by algorithms or by automation. We are not preparing our children correctly. We're teaching them certain things, but they are not embracing a new way of thinking about the world. Or sometimes the children are embracing, our students are embracing new ways to think about the world, and we as educators cannot keep up with them. So we find ourselves talking about things that are no longer relevant. We use models or examples that have long since lost their fashion. And what younger people are wanting to explore and to experience are things that we are not equipped to keep up with. Now, again, no judgment on any of you. This is something we all experience. I am a professional futurist, and my children sit with me, and my children correct some of my thinking. My children introduce ideas to me. So as educators, we need to go back and start learning a new language. We need a new way of thinking about the future, new ABCs, new terminology, new mental frameworks. And that is some of the things that I'm going to introduce you to today. So let's start with an A. Let's anticipate the future. We need to, in our educating, we need to anticipate the future. What will our students need to know next? What will they be experiencing later? I have a colleague who wanted to educate or prepare his son's education for the future. And they were thinking, if you go to university and you study what is already there, you're going to be preparing yourself for a job that is currently real, but may not be valid in a few years' time. So how could they prepare him for a future that wasn't there yet? So they came up with a new career. They came up with a new idea. They prepared him to create habitats for Mars. So they said to this young man, imagine that one day you're going to be the architect designing habitats, places to live on another planet. If you were going to have that job in 15 years' time, what do you need to learn now? And they put together an unusual curriculum for him to learn new skills because they could anticipate the future. And that is what we all need to do. It's not easy, though. It's difficult. This is Thomas Watson. He was the IBM chairman in 1943. So IBM, as you may recall, international business machines. They have a whole lot of computers, a whole lot of technology. They do some amazing things. But back in 1943, the person who was the head of this computer company said, I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. In my home right now, there are 3 of us here, and there are more than 5 computers in our house. So it's not exactly true. He didn't get this right. But we have to understand why he didn't get it right. Back in 1943, computers were vastly different from what they are right now. Now, this particular picture, and I don't know if anybody's in the chat box or anything like that, but if you can guess what that is, I'll give you a second or two to guess what this is. They're using a machine to lift this huge device up into an airplane, and then they're going to fly it somewhere else, and then they're going to take it off, and they're going to put it into a big room. And it is something that we are anticipating. It's got something to do with computers, but what might it be? Folks, what you are looking at right now is a hard drive, a 5 megabyte hard drive. Now just imagine how little you could do with 5 megabytes. If any of us have got a smartphone anywhere near you, you know that it has gigabytes of power and memory. The presentation that I've designed for you today is way bigger than 5 megabytes. In fact, some of the pictures on this slide deck are bigger than 5 megabytes. But and this photograph is in the 1960s, so 20 odd years after Thomas Watson said only 5 computers. That was in the 1960s. And because the technology was so big and so difficult and so expensive, they couldn't anticipate what they would look like in the future. Now, this next picture, this is a man holding up another little flash drive, a hard drive, but a small one. It is 1 terabyte big. All right. So that is the difference from the 1960s to 2020. It was about 2015, I think, was this photograph. That is how much technology evolved, how fast and rapid and exponential the world grew to develop that hard drive that just came down in size and increased in power. This is the exponential world we're looking at. And exponential means that our brains, no matter how clever we are, no matter how much we've educated ourselves, our brains cannot conceptualize exponential worlds. So let's try and explain this. This little hard drive that he's holding is 1 terabyte big. It is the equivalent of 200,000 of those 5 megabyte hard drives there. That is really, really huge. But let's just give Thomas Watson some credit here, because when we think about this, we go, we can't be very impressed with a man who headed up a technology company and couldn't imagine the future of the world. But Thomas Watson was really clever. He did do some very innovative things, and he did set that company up, IBM, to do some amazing things. What we're seeing here is an artificial intelligence machine called Watson. It's IBM Watson. So they named it after Thomas Watson. And this artificial intelligence machine has deep learning, it has algorithms that helps it to learn things itself. It has been used in different fields. It's been used in the medical field to capture all of the data and information and to help doctors to make better diagnoses. It has also been helped in the legal field, so it can capture all of the case history. So instead of having a whole bunch of young articled legal clerks sitting there pouring through the textbooks trying to find case studies that will support their clients' claims, you just plug in the information into IBM Watson and it will come out in seconds with all of the data that you need. And that is what the world is like. So this machine named after Thomas Watson can do infinitely more than Thomas Watson could ever even imagine at the time. That is the exponential world that we're in. So if we're anticipating the future, what does that mean? We need to, whenever we assume that we know, we want to change that assumption into an anticipation. If I think next year is going to be like this, but a little bit faster, a little bit bigger, a little bit more, try and challenge your thinking and see how far you can go. Can you really anticipate more that the world might be reflecting that we're not paying attention to? So that was A, anticipate. B is to challenge your beliefs. And this is really important. Not easy. It's difficult. It's sometimes uncomfortable. But challenging our beliefs means that we don't just assume that everything we've believed in the past, everything that we've learned in the past, everything that we've taught in the past, that it is all going to be or continue to be relevant into the future. We want to challenge our beliefs, even our core beliefs about what the world should look like, what values should look like, what work should look like, what education should look like. Whenever you think you know something, just know that just being settled in that knowing could be a dangerous thing, because it could mean that you're missing out on changes that are happening that you as an educator should be aware of, because you want to lead the way for your students. So let's talk about a couple of beliefs that we could challenge just in terms of time and history. But what I want to do is maybe suggest a technique right up front. There's a technique called comparative reading. What you want to do is anything that you believe in, you want to go and find the opposite, where somebody believes the opposite thing to you, and go and read that. Or I'm saying read kind of broadly, but maybe you subscribe to some newsletters, go and subscribe to some newsletters in a different field from yours, or in a different part of the world, or in a different belief system from yours, and just open your mind, allow your brain to expand with new ideas, because that will help you to understand what is happening in the world, to understand the pace of change, to understand the literacy, the future's literacy that you're trying to learn. So look at the opposite of what you believe. I'm not telling you that you need to change your values. I'm just suggesting that you want to challenge your values and make sure that you know that you believe the right thing. You may change or you may reinforce what you believe, but you don't know what that will look like until you take the courageous step to actually go and explore what is opposite to what you already believe or what has been done in your part of the world. Anyway, so let's look at some issues about time. We think of time in a linear fashion. And especially as educators, we love timelines. We want to show what came before and what came after. We have timelines of kings and queens and timelines of presidents and timelines of pandemics. And we think that the world is nice and neat and runs in an organized fashion. But that is not real. What reality is that time is messy. You know what it's like, that you're working and you're struggling with something. It seems to take so long and then suddenly it works, or you are making progress and then you hit a plateau and you can't go any further. Maybe you're working with some students who seem to be making progress and then they're not. But that's because time is messy, and our experience of time is not neat. We experience it in fluctuating ways. So we don't want you to think of things being ordered and organized and neat the whole time, because that's not a real picture. And if we can allow our minds to think of this as a kind of flexible experience of time, we might actually be able to get better results and give ourselves some space to allow ourselves or our students or our own understanding of something to go through that sticky phase when we're really trying to understand it. That relates very closely to this one. Things occur slowly and then rapidly. And again, in education, this is a very relevant conversation. When we're trying to learn a new technique, a new platform, a new formula, a new way of doing something, you're introducing a subject to your students, things go really slowly. You have to build the foundation. You have to give them the framework of what you're talking about. You have to kind of give them a bit of history so that they can see why this is relevant. And there'll be students sitting there kind of going, I don't quite get what you're talking about. I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense. And then all of a sudden, one day, it will make sense to them. It'll all fall into place. And I remember this in my own science class years ago. This teacher was explaining some science to us, and he was going on, and I just remember I think it was electricity, and I'm looking at him going, I'm not getting it. I'm not getting it. And then all of a sudden, I'm sitting in the back row. All of a sudden, I understood, and he actually laughed happily, and he pointed out to the whole class. He said, look at Charlotte. She has just worked it out. And in that moment, everything fell into place. So that is important for us to realize. But it happens in terms of us looking at the future as well. We will look at the future and say, we want to prepare for the future. We want to prepare our own curriculum for the future. We want to prepare our thinking for the future, or our students. And it's hard, it's difficult. We're slogging through this. And then all of a sudden it works. All of a sudden we get there. And that is what we experience with time. So time is not neat and not organized. It moves at different paces. Another thing we want to understand about time and about the future is that there are weak signals about what is coming, and those weak signals become stronger. Essentially, that is how we identify trends. So if you're not paying attention to the rest of the world, and I love that this organization's, a global organization, we need to look at this big picture, because if we just look at our city and our circumstances, we don't see any signals. We don't see what is happening. We're just totally immersed in this. But if we can lift our head up, and I'm not saying that we need to go back and do another degree ourselves, and we don't have to read deeply, and we don't have to take out huge textbooks. We just want to pay attention. We want to scan the headlines around the world. Because if you're scanning the headlines about the future of education, or the future of the subject that you're teaching, or the topic that you're sharing with your students, if you pay attention to what is happening around the world, you will hear somebody in Canada say something, and somebody in Mexico say something, and someone in Australia, and then someone in Nigeria. And all of a sudden you're picking up a pattern and saying, I thought that was just a story, and that was just a story, but maybe this is a pattern. Maybe this is a signal of what is coming into the future. And once you do that, you are learning futures literacy. You are learning to read the future. You can do that. And in your education, you can do that with your students as well. You can help them to prepare for the future by saying it's not just what is in this class that I'm teaching you that is important. You need to be responsible to scan around the world and look for signals about where the subject is going in the future. And that's when we pass on to our students the agency, the responsibility for them to learn for themselves and to grow and develop. There's another thing we need to understand, and it's about change. We all tend to think that we don't like change. People don't like change. And it's not true. We like change when we initiate it. What we don't like is change forced on us. So inbound change is something that we resist. If somebody comes to you and says, you have to do this, we want to resist it. But when we decide we're going to do it, then it's an outbound change. And then we embrace it. Then we want to do that. And so again, and we talk about this in any space when we're talking about passing on an education topic, teaching or training other people. When we go to students and we say to them, this is what you need to know, you need to learn this, you need to do this, they will resist it. Even if they're sitting there going, yes, okay, I need to know it. But because we're forcing it on them, there is this natural human tendency to resist. But if we can help them to discover that themselves, if we help them to explore some of it, if we allow them to tell us as the teacher something, then it's an outbound change. Then they're discovering it for themselves. that lesson will be way more valuable for that student, and that memory of that lesson will last longer because that change has come from within them rather than being imposed from the outside. So I'm not here to challenge your teaching methods or methodologies, but if you have that opportunity to invite your students to discover things for themselves, it will be that much more valuable. And that is actually a futures thinking way of thinking about the future. It's a way of really preparing ourselves to be lifelong learners. We do not want any students to come to the end of a stage of education and say, I'm done with learning. They need to know constantly that for the rest of their lives, if they want to remain relevant in the workplace, if they want to still have something to contribute, that they have to be constant, lifelong learners. So here's another thing that we learn about the future is that we have a cultural view of history. We have a cultural view of how time moves. And this is just an interesting thing to think of because it challenges sometimes how we think about time. And then it allows us to think that maybe other cultures are different. Maybe if this is different, there are other ways of looking at things. So one is linear time. For a lot of societies, we just think in terms of linear time. Like, you know, in the Common Era over the last 2,000 odd years, this is what has been happening. And there's this time progression in a straight line. And we think of kind of like the start of the creation of the world and the end of the world. And this, and they're far away, but this is just a straight line for us. Whereas other societies, other cultures think of time more in terms of cycles. There are eons that come and go. They cycle around each other. This is easy to see when we think about the seasons. You've got autumn and winter, and then spring and summer, and these seasons cycle over and over again. Why is it important for us to know this? Because sometimes there are things that we can learn from history that repeat again. Sometimes in our own lives, we learn lessons over and over again until we get them. So things are not always in a neat progression. Sometimes there are these cycles that we experience. And some societies even think about time in terms of pendulum, that we swing from one extreme to another. And if you want to see where that happens, look at politics. They will swing from one extreme of the political aisle to the other extreme, and then they don't like that, and then they swing back, and the next time they vote, they swing back again. And this is what humankind is like. So think about time in different ways. It helps us to understand how our students are learning. It helps us to think about the future in ways that are easier to think about the future. We don't want to be overwhelmed and scared by the future. Then there's one more thing to look at in terms of time. It's that a lot of people confuse these. They think about a moment in time being a trend or a trend being a moment in time. And they're two very separate things. So for example, if you're working with students and you're looking at their marks, if one student is consistently been getting, and I don't know how you measure your marks there, in South Africa, it's A, B's, and C's. So a student is getting a C, 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 and then they get an A. It doesn't mean all of a sudden that student is now going to be an A student. That could be just a moment in time because it is different from the trend. But if the student is getting C, C, B, A, B, etc., then maybe this is a trend towards better marks. Maybe they're moving away from C's because they're starting to understand they're getting more towards the A's. So that could be a trend. We need to think about this because if we kind of prepare all of our thinking around this is going to be the way the world is in the future, and it's just a moment in time instead of a trend, then we're preparing ourselves for the wrong things. Or maybe we're saying, okay, this isn't important. This was just a moment in time. That was just a blip in in history, and it won't happen again. And we've missed the opportunity to lean into a trend that we might need for education, that we might need to teach our children or our students. So you really want to play around. And this is easy to do. You want to look around at things and see, are these trends or are these events, just isolated events, isolated stories? Play around and look in your headlines. When you go out shopping, look at things that are on the shelves. Is this a trend towards something, or is this just somebody's come up with a branding idea and then next month it's going to disappear again? And the more you can pay attention to that, the more aware you will be of the future. And this is important for me because while I am a professional futurist, I believe everyone is a natural futurist. And if you are educators or trainers, you are futurists too, because you are helping other people to learn things, to prepare themselves for the future. You are investing in the future. You are helping to design the future. You are a futurist and you can be a better futurist. And this is just one technique to do that. So essentially, the C, when we get down to it, is that we need to make better choices. We need to make better choices about how we think about the future, better choices about what we're teaching our students so that we're not teaching them things that will become irrelevant in the future. Maybe better choices about how we teach. So there's a whole lot of things we want to think about. And I know that futures thinking can be really, you're sitting on this call today, listening to this, and you thought you were just going to learn something interesting. And I'm saying you need to learn an entire new language and an entire new mindset and framework of thinking about the future. That can be quite scary. I do have a very simple ebook about this. And if you want to drop me an email or work through GETI and ask for it, I'll be very happy to send that ebook on to you that just introduces in a broader sense what futures literacy is about and how you can prepare yourselves for it. All right, so I'm going to now give you one more model. This model is really interesting. It's very simple. And if you just take these 4 steps, and I'll tell you when we get to the screen, a summary of the 4 steps, you are able to create a futures plan this afternoon. When the session is done, you can sit down and start creating your own futures plan. You know from educating people on your field, your topic, you know that it is a lot deeper. You know that an introductory lecture into what you're going to talk about is not sufficient for a student to be able to do everything they need to do. But it is enough to give them a framework to get started, to get interested, to dive deeper into this in the future. So this is the model. So it's a compass. A compass is because we want to know which direction to go in. It's very important that we don't keep educating ourselves or improving our skills in a direction that is irrelevant to the future. For example, you don't want to be the best fax operator in the world when we don't need faxes anymore because now we're doing things with WhatsApp and we can email PDFs to each other. But, so look at what you're doing and make sure that it is relevant for the future, that you're pointing in the right direction. So that's why I use a compass. The very first step of this compass, step 1, is to gather intelligence. You want to gather to yourself the knowledge and information you need to start on this journey. And if you're trying to teach, if you're trying to pass on some of this information, you know that the first step is to gather intelligence. What do you know about your field? What do you know about your students? What do you know about education, that whole skill set? And you want to get it all together so that you can prepare yourself for the future. When we are preparing for the future in a broader sense, you want to gather intelligence. There is something called futures literacy. There are models around the world. There are futurists who can teach people these concepts. These are things why it's important. And all of that, you're listening right now to my voice, all of that is step 1, gathering intelligence for the future. Step 2 is to manage change. And that seems pretty simple, very broad. Why, there's a whole kind of category here. Why are we looking at such a broad picture for managing change? But essentially, managing change is helping us to move from one state to another, to move from one way of thinking to another way of thinking, giving up old models, putting them away, drawing a line under something and saying, we're not doing that anymore because it is no longer relevant. All of that is managing change, getting rid of old things that do not serve us, and finding new models, new thinking, new ways of whatever it is we're looking at for the future that will serve us. All of that is managing change. And we as humans become overwhelmed, even when that change is self-initiated. Even when we want to do this, we can get overwhelmed and feel like there's too much. I can't grasp everything that's going on. I didn't know that this field was so big. Where do I start? This is scary. It's all step 2. It's just managing change. And there are ways that you can approach it. So gather intelligence, manage change, and then step 3 is describe the future. And for me as a futurist, this is the most fun part. This is really interesting. We want to describe what we want the future to be. Think about any time that you go, maybe you've gone out to do something, or you've gone to a restaurant, or you've gone for a day out, and you're walking around, you go, this is not what I wanted today. I don't like this. This isn't nice. And somebody says to you, well, what do you want? And you go, I don't know. All right, it's very, very difficult to plan for the future if you don't know what you want. So some people look at the future and they see technology and they see change and they go, I don't want this. I don't like this. And that's not helpful because they can't say what they actually do want. So describing the future is us creating scenarios to look at the future and to say, I don't want a future like that. I do want a future like this. How do we get there instead of there? What decisions, what do we do today? What do we stop doing today? What do we start doing today? What do we start exploring today so that we head in that direction as opposed to that direction? You can make those decisions now, and you can pass that on in your education as well. You can help students to realize that they have a choice in the future, that there is a direction that they can go into, but they have to be able to describe that future first. Scenario planning is lovely, and we could spend an entire day just talking about scenario planning, but it's a very powerful way of looking at the future. And then step 4, just like any good educator, is to test your strategy. You do a test, you write an exam, and you see, have we taught properly? Has the student learned properly? Have we taught the right things? Can they pass this exam? And if they can do that, then we have completed the circle. And then we start again. Gather intelligence, just manage change, describe the future, and then test your strategy, test your responses. That is how we prepare for the future. I'm going to give you one more little picture before we come towards the end, because this is a lot. This is a lot to think about, and I don't want to overwhelm you. I just want to give you a taste of what is possible when you start to think of being a futurist. So there are just, in this case, how do we respond? How do we think about the future and what we're experiencing in time? So basically, there are 3 parts to it. The first part is the push of the present moment. When you have students in your area of responsibility, you've got this present moment. You're going to be teaching them today. You're going to be passing on something to them today. And there is this responsibility in this present moment to push them forward, to prepare them. Maybe they need to learn certain skills so that they can get a job. Maybe they need to be able to pass certain exams so they can get further education. So there is a push in this present moment that we're moving forward. But at the same time, there is a pull from the future. So we look at the future, we say, this is the future we want. And it's almost like you put a stake in that future, and then you're pulling yourself towards it because you want to get there, because that's what you want. And you want to avoid this other option that you don't like. So there are technologies. So we say, in the future, we will be able to. In the future, we will live longer. In the future, we will move around the planet faster. In the future, we will be able to read even faster. In the future, there will be more information to read. In the future, there will be more careers. There is this pull from the future that we have to respond to at the moment. And at the same time, while we're being pushed by our responsibilities in the present moment and we're being pulled towards a future that we want, we're sometimes still stuck. We can't move because we have the weight of our history that is holding us back. And the weight of that history is the way we've done it before, the traditions that we've had before, the way our institutions are created, the expectation of parents. So we might have students who want to be entrepreneurial and innovative, and parents want them to be doctors and lawyers. So we got this weight of history that keeps us stuck so that we can't move forward. And if you can think about those 3 things, what is the present moment trying to push you towards? What is the future that you're trying to pull yourself towards? And what is holding you back or holding you down that you cannot move any further? Again, lots of really interesting things to explore in that. And I encourage and invite you, if you want to contact me or get a copy of that ebook, just to get a better insight into this. I'm very happy to share it with you. I'm going to go back literally in my closing now to show you this picture. This was my family photograph from years ago, and my dad trying to prepare me for the future. and trying to prepare me so that I didn't make the same mistakes that he made, that I had more opportunities that he had. I appreciate my father. I appreciate what he tried to do, but he did the best that he could do, the best that he knew how. And it wasn't quite enough. And now I look at my children and say, how do I prepare my children? So this is my family photograph. We're at the airport during COVID, during lockdowns. We all have our masks on. That's me right in the corner there with the red jacket, and the girl next to me with the bun and the green shirt. That is my daughter, Hannah. And we're at the airport to say goodbye to Hannah, to send her to the Netherlands, because she is studying a creative business degree that is not available in South Africa, but she's studying in the Netherlands. She's getting a global picture of the world. She is meeting people and creating a bigger network. She is challenging her mind to think about things that I never thought about at her age. She is experiencing things that will prepare her for the future that we want for our family. And the two girls with her, her sister and her stepsister, they're going to be following her to the Netherlands as well, so that they can all learn and grow and experience this. Because this is how we prepare for the future, by exploring new areas, exploring new things, opening our mind up to new ideas and new opportunities. And that is my wish for you, and that is my wish for you and your families and your students and the people that you work with, that you would have the courage to try and explore this. This wasn't a fun moment. There were tears. There was anxiety. We miss each other dreadfully, but we know that we are preparing for a better future than I was prepared for myself. And that is what you can do, because you are all futurists, and everybody that you work with is also a natural futurist. But we can be better if we learn futures literacy so that we can talk about this better. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation. I'm going to hand back to Joy and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so very much, ma'am, for that very exciting and very interesting presentation. Contrary to our belief that normally people say the future is the most uncertain thing that we can think of, and we can never plan our future. We don't know what the future holds, and future comes knocking at our doors suddenly. But then here in your presentation, you are preparing us for the beautiful future that lies ahead, with a really radiant hope in our hearts that yes, we all have something exciting to look forward to. And I think by understanding that the future is in our own hands, we are influenced by external and internal factors. We can then consciously work towards a better future for ourselves, as you just mentioned, as well as for others. And I think for our dear, dear educators, our teachers, this should be one of the skills taught during the teacher training, alongside with the reflection of their professional activities and choices. Because futures literate teachers are the ones who can acknowledge change, adapt, and be resilient, as well as make change happen itself. So, because we are all, excited to mold the future generation of all countries, and that is one of the most quintessential things that any country needs to undertake. And today's presentation has definitely inspired us. And even those, who have that laid back attitude, I'm sure they've, geared up and pulled up the socks, and they are excited to look ahead. Thank you so very much, ma'am, for that. And just one or two questions that has cropped up in my mind is that after this talk of yours, there'll be questions like, how should the role of teachers and education in general be and is that should be seen for the future?
Okay, huge question. I really think that the very first step is that awareness, that we need to be aware of the fact that sometimes we're not anticipating the future well. So if we can be more aware of it, then that will almost naturally come through in our teaching, that we will help our students to become more aware of the future. So before we go and get degrees or read books or anything else like that on futures thinking, the first step is just to start talking about it. And if there is space in the curriculum, space in the classroom, It's to be able to say, all right, so we're talking about this topic now. What might it look like in the future? What kind of questions would we be talking about this in 10 or 15 years' time? And just that awareness starts to frame our mind to think about the future in a more helpful way.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Uh, Another question that comes to mind is, what are the different challenges that you think we will face in equipping our teachers and educators for futures literacy?
In
I
South
think
Africa, we have
primarily from the point of view of their mindset.
from the mindset, yes. In South Africa, I'm anticipating we have a similar problem to you, is that we have so many students and so many teachers, and trying to change the thinking is really difficult. You got the weight of our history, of what we've inherited, and now we're trying to add something new in. I think one of the biggest challenges is the resistance to having to learn something new, the resistance to finding a practical way to have a conversation about it. So the mindset change is really difficult. It's not enough to just acknowledge and say, yes, I should think differently. We really have to kind of build in a whole way of thinking. We have to be immersed in it. And that is a big step. So we can do it. We can do it in one classroom. We can do it with one educational program. But to do it across the board in an entire country, that is going to be a lot more challenging. But I think that what I want people to do is, this first step is to be aware. And then the second step would be almost to desire to learn more. And then once we start moving, that momentum starts to grow. And then we find ways to kind of flavor the entire education process with this futures thinking mindset. And once every curriculum is taught, we're not changing what we're teaching, but we're changing the conversation around it, so that we include in this part of the conversation as well.
Thank you so very much, ma'am. Very beautifully answered. Uh, what is your take on the question, like, is the are the education systems lagging behind the accelerating changes that we are already facing in the present moment?
Yes, sorry, I'm aware that the connection is not very good at the moment.
I'll repeat it for you. Are the
Can you hear
education
me?
systems lagging behind the accelerating changes we are already facing in the present time, ma'am?
Yes, I'm going to try and answer. I know the system is, the connection is not very good. Our education system is lagging behind, but so is legislation lagging behind, and so is the conversation about ethics lagging behind the changes that we're experiencing. I'm not sure if you
Okay.
caught that.
Yes, ma'am. And
Thank you.
what are the basic skills one needs as a future educator in the 21st century?
It's tempting to say that the skills are technical skills like coding and, computers and technology, but the more essential skills would be imagination. Um, we need to be able to use our imagination to help our students to think about the future, to talk about it to talk about things in the future that aren't real right now. So it's imagination, it's innovation, innovation which embraces creativity. We need to find new ways of doing things. Innovation isn't inventing something new; it's taking something from somewhere else and applying it here. So it's just creating a new technique in this space. So we want to be innovative, and we want to teach innovation and creativity. And the skill of anticipation, and that can be taught quite well. When you want to look at things, there's games that can be played and things like that, but you want to look at something and anticipate what comes next. And as that skill develops, then when we see a new technology or we see a new something that is happening, we can look at that and anticipate what might happen next. So as an example, right now in Dubai, there's this whole conversation about this city that they want to build that's in a line. So it's only, so wide, but it's really, really long. And all the cities, all the people will live there, and the schools and business and everything inside this long line. And it looks interesting. It's been designed architecturally, But now you want to anticipate, what will it be like to live in a place like that? What will it be like to educate in a place like that? What would it be like in terms of the environmental impact? So anticipation is a very, very important skill that we need to learn. So those would be my top: imagination, innovation, and anticipation.
These are the key words. I hope all our educators, our parents, our teachers, everybody is listening, the students also. Imagination, innovation. These are very, very important points that ma'am has said and left the key words with us. And we know very well that futures learning or literacy rests on the human mental faculty that enables us to imagine. So, all the three I's: imagination, innovation, and one more
No,
I
the other
is
one was anticipation.
yes, one is anticipation. So, anticipation, innovation, imagination. These are the three keywords that we are going to take away from this presentation. And also, we need to find out that why is learning with new literacies essential for a student as well as for a future educator? Why do you think, ma'am?
Um, so is the question, why is this literacy important for them?
Yeah, yeah, essential for a
Yes.
student as well as for an educator.
All right. So I'll give this example. I'm learning Spanish just for fun and for to challenge my brain to learn something new. And I'm using an app, and I go online and I read little children's stories so that I can learn this language. So I'm learning how to become literate in a new language. And in the beginning, I'm learning literally, like animal sounds and colors and the name of the house and the cup and the table and everything else, like we would with little children learning to read. And at a certain point, I've now can put sentences together so I can construct it. But I'm not at the point where I have the courage to talk to a Spanish speaking person and have a conversation because I'm not fluent. So I have enough information to look and know what is happening, but I cannot have the conversation yet because I'm not fluent. I just am literate, barely literate in this new language. So for me, futures literacy is important as this first stage so that we become futures fluent, so that we can sit down and have a meeting about let's do this in the future, but then we can really think about everything that implies. What is the technological implication? What laws would need to be invented or might be invented? Is this good for the planet and for the people? What are the ethics around it? What are the implications, the repercussions of this thing that we're exploring? And the more we can do that, the better a future we can design. And this is really, really important because remember, step three was describing the future. If I describe a future and plan a future that is good for me and my people, my family, the people who are important to me, and only them, that's a bad future. I'm planning a future that is excluding everyone else. But the more futures fluent we become, so we move through literacy, we become fluent. The more we do that, the more we can create a future that is good for everyone, that is inclusive, that thinks about people who are outside of our little circle of concern. And then we are co-creating the future. We are co-creating an existence where we can actually work together and create opportunities for all of us. That we're not creating an opportunity for some of us that will leave other people unemployed or unemployable or in poverty. We need to find ways to turn this around. A good future is one that is inclusive and that we have thought about all of these implications. And we only get to create those futures if we've learned how to speak this in the first place, if we learned the literacy.
Thank you so very much, ma'am. The answers are beautiful. We have some lovely takeaways. Exciting to see the presentation. Amazing to hear you. And I think we are all having lovely takeaways with us. As for me personally, what the catch line was that, as you said, the message for the students that I feel is that what you said, they should never say, I am done with learning. Rather, they have to be equipped to become constant, lifelong learners. I think I
Yes.
took that as a very, very important point for our young and ignited minds. So, thank you so very much, ma'am, for being
Thank
with us, for gracing the session. And thank you, dear viewers, for being with us here this afternoon. I also would like to thank all the other viewers who will be eventually seeing the session. And let me assure you, you will have some wonderful takeaways that you will be able to dwell on, think, imagine, innovate, as ma'am says, and anticipate for a real bright future ahead in terms of literacy, education, and of course, a beautiful life. Thank you so very much, ma'am.
thank you.
Have a lovely day, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Stay blessed. Thank you.
Thank you.